The conference room on the 41st floor of Halcyon Technologies smelled like cold coffee and ambition, two things that had curdled into something indistinguishable from each other by 9:15 on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus Webb did not belong there, or so the room had already decided. He had arrived 12 minutes early, the way he always arrived places, quietly without announcement, carrying a worn canvas messenger bag that had been through 2 cross-country moves and 1 deployment, and which still bore a faint stain near the bottom left corner that he had never bothered to explain to anyone. He wore a gray zip-up hoodie over a plain white shirt, dark jeans, and shoes that were clean but not new. He sat in the chair nearest the door, set his bag on the floor beside him, and folded his hands on the table and watched the room fill up around him. Diana Cho arrived last, which was deliberate, because Diana Cho did everything deliberately. She was 38, the newly appointed VP of Product Acquisition at Halcyon Technologies, a company that had spent the last 4 years swallowing smaller firms whole and digesting them with the bland efficiency of something much older and much less interesting. She wore a white blazer over a charcoal turtleneck. Her heels added 3 inches and she did not need them. She set a slim silver laptop on the table, looked around the room with a practiced survey of someone who has already ranked every person present, and paused on Marcus for exactly long enough to register something before looking away. "Mr. Webb," she said without sitting down, "we reviewed your platform submission over the weekend." He looked up. "Okay." She opened the laptop with one motion, the way you open something you've already decided to close. "The coding architecture test we sent, the one designed to benchmark the structural integrity of proprietary AI systems, showed significant gaps in your framework scalability. Significant enough that we're not going to be moving forward with the acquisition conversation today." The room had gone still. 2 of her associates at the far end of the table exchanged a glance. One of them, a young man with rectangular glasses, looked briefly at Marcus and then at the table. Marcus did not shift in his chair. He did not straighten or lean forward. He picked up the paper cup of water that had been placed at each seat and drank from it slowly, and when he set it back down, the sound it made against the table was the only sound in the room. "Understood," he said. Diana's expression carried something that stopped just short of a smile. "We appreciate you coming in. We'll validate the test results internally and reach back out if anything changes, but I want to be transparent with you. We've seen a dozen platforms structured similarly, and they all run into the same ceiling." She turned back to her laptop before he had finished standing up. He lifted his bag from the floor, settled the strap across his shoulder, and walked to the door. He did not look back. He did not say anything else. She did not know, could not have known, standing in that room with her silver laptop and her borrowed confidence, that the man she had just dismissed as a ceiling case held 14 registered software patents, 3 of which formed the foundational architecture that Halcyon's own platform had been quietly built upon for the past 2 years. She did not know that the coding tests she had used to dismiss him had been answered correctly, and that his platform had deliberately revealed only 60% of its capability, because Marcus Webb had not yet decided whether he trusted her company enough to show her the rest. She did not know any of this. And what happened 30 days later, in that same room on that same floor, would become the kind of story that her associates told each other for a long time afterward, in the same low voices people use when they have witnessed something they cannot entirely explain. Don't look away from this one. What Marcus kept hidden was about to become the only thing that mattered. 48 hours before that Tuesday morning meeting, Marcus Webb had been standing in the kitchen of his apartment in East Oakland at 5:47 in the morning, making 2 lunches. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been called Up and Coming for 11 years without ever quite arriving. The kitchen was narrow, with a window above the sink that faced the alley, and in the mornings when the light came in, it came in gray and slow, the way light moves when it hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. He made his daughter's lunch first, always. A turkey sandwich on whole wheat, an apple cut into wedges because she had told him 2 years ago that she didn't like biting into whole apples and he had not forgotten, a small bag of pretzels, and a note folded into a small square that he tucked beneath the sandwich bag. He wrote the notes by hand on whatever scrap of paper was nearby. Sometimes a receipt, sometimes the back of a utility envelope. This one said, "You're the reason I get up. Have a good one, B." Her name was Lily, But she had been bee since she was 3 years old, when she had decided that bees were the most important thing in the world because they kept everything alive without anyone thanking them. He had never tried to argue with that. Lily was 14 now, not the same girl who had announced her love of bees across a backyard in Sacramento 7 summers ago, but still somehow the same essential person. Watchful, precise, curious about things in a way that made adults slow down when they spoke to her. She was in 9th grade at a magnet school for STEM, and her room was covered in diagrams and programming notes and a periodic table she had annotated herself in 4 colors of ink. Marcus had raised her alone for 9 years since her mother, Renata, had taken a position in Singapore and, in stages so gradual he had not recognized them as departure until they were complete, simply not come back. There had been no dramatic ending. There was no single conversation he could point to. There was just one day, the apartment and Lily and his own hands, and the life he was going to have to build out of what was in front of him. He had a 2011 Honda Civic with a crack in the rear right taillight that he kept meaning to fix. He paid his rent 11 days early every month out of discipline rather than abundance. He kept $40 in a small envelope in the kitchen drawer for emergencies, and he had been keeping $40 in that envelope for 3 years, which told a story about how his emergencies had been going. What he did not talk about, and what almost no one in his day-to-day life knew, was that between 2 and 5 in the morning, in a second bedroom he used as an office, separated from Lily's room by the apartment's single shared wall, Marcus Webb wrote code the way other people wrote letters, with a specificity and a patience that had taken him 15 years to develop and that still surprised him when he looked at it. The same way a craftsman can be surprised by the quality of what his own hands produce. He had earned his first patent at 26, 18 months after leaving the Air Force, working out of a studio apartment in Tucson with a second-hand laptop and a library card. The patent was for a data compression protocol so efficient it reduced redundant server load by 43% at scale. He had licensed it quietly to 3 mid-sized firms and used the income to live, carefully and without comment, while he built the next thing and the thing after that. By the time he moved to Oakland and enrolled Lily in the STEM magnet school, he held 9 patents and was working toward a platform, a full-stack AI infrastructure tool he had spent 4 years developing, that he believed was, without exaggeration, the most efficient system of its kind currently in existence. He had named it Meridian. He picked Lily up from school every weekday at 3:15 in the Civic. She always got in, dropped her bag in the back seat, and told him one thing that had happened that day. Not the most important thing, but the first thing she thought of, which was how she processed. He had learned to listen to the first thing and wait. On the Monday before the Halcyon meeting, she had gotten in and said, "Someone in my CS class thinks Python is the only language that matters." I didn't say anything. He had kept his eyes on the road. "Good call." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because they'll figure it out. And then they'll remember you didn't correct them, and that'll matter more than being right." She was quiet for a moment, watching the road the way he did. "Is that why you never tell people about your work?" she asked. He had not answered right away. 3 weeks before the Halcyon meeting, Marcus had received the email through his legal representation, a patent and IP firm in San Francisco called Arlen & Cole, where a partner named James Arlen had been quietly representing Marcus's interests for 6 years with the low-key intensity of someone who had seen a lot of smart people handle their situations poorly, and had made it his purpose to help at least one of them do it differently. James had sent the email at 11:42 at night, which was unusual, with the subject line, "Halcyon wants Meridian. Read carefully." Marcus had read it at 2:15 in the morning, sitting at his desk in the back room with the desk lamp on its lowest setting so as not to wake Lily through the wall. He read it twice. Then he set his coffee down and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he typed a reply that was 4 words long. "Schedule the intake meeting." James called him the next morning at 6:50, before Lily was up. "I want you to understand what's on the table," he said. His voice was the kind of careful that comes from having been wrong before in a way that costs something. "They're looking at a full acquisition. The number they floated in the preliminary is north of 20 million. Marcus was standing at the kitchen window, watching the alley below where a pigeon was investigating an empty coffee cup with the systematic attention of someone who suspects they are being watched. "Who's leading their acquisition team?" "Diana Cho, VP of Product Acquisition. She's been with them 2 years." Efficient. Rest. Not someone who takes her time with decisions she thinks she's already made. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Set it up, he said. But tell them I'll be attending alone. No representation in the room. James paused. Marcus. I know what I'm doing, James. James's exhale was slow and careful, the sound of a man keeping a professional opinion between himself and his coffee. She's going to run a benchmark test on Meridian's architecture. Standard for them. She'll send it before the meeting. I know. And you'll answer it. I'll answer enough of it. What James did not ask, and what Marcus did not explain, was that the benchmark test Diana Cho used to evaluate platform submissions had been designed by a team of 3 engineers at Halcyon, who had built their evaluation framework on a methodology drawn directly from a 2019 paper published under a pseudonym in the MIT Systems Review, a pseudonym that happened to be the middle name of Marcus Webb's grandfather, under which Marcus had published 4 research papers in a period of 3 years, while simultaneously raising an 8-year-old daughter and holding down a contract position as a remote systems consultant. He had known when the test arrived exactly what it was and exactly what it could see. He had answered 60% of it correctly and left the rest architecturally visible but superficially incomplete, like a book left open to the middle with a bookmark in the wrong place. He was 14 days away from a filing deadline on 2 additional patents that would, once registered, extend his protection across the full range of Meridian's most advanced functions, the same functions that Halcyon had quietly integrated without licensing into their own SaaS platform, which had launched publicly 8 months ago and which was currently generating $11 million in annual recurring revenue. He knew this because Lily, doing her own browsing one Saturday afternoon, had pulled up Halcyon's platform demo on her tablet and said, "Dad, come look at this." He had walked to the doorway of the living room and stood there. "Their compression model," she said, tilting the tablet toward him. "Doesn't that look like yours?" He had looked at the screen for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "It does." She looked at him with the careful attentiveness of someone who understood more than she was being told. She had her mother's eyes and his stillness, which was a combination that missed very little. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He had taken the tablet gently, closed the demo, and handed it back to her. "Make sure my work is protected," he said. "Then let them come to me." She had nodded, slowly, like someone absorbing information they already half understood. Diana Cho's rejection of Meridian, delivered in that cold Tuesday meeting with the paper cup and the practice survey and the laptop already angled away, had not surprised him, not really, because he had recognized it for what it was before she finished speaking, a pressure tactic, or possibly a genuine error of evaluation, or possibly both. It did not matter which. The filing deadline was 14 days away. He had already submitted. What he had not expected was the follow-up email that arrived 4 hours after the meeting, from Diana's office, requesting that he sign a standard non-disclosure and non-compete agreement before they could formally close the acquisition evaluation. He had forwarded it to James without comment. James had called back in 6 minutes, which was the fastest he had ever called back in 6 years. "She's trying to lock you out," he said. His voice was no longer careful. "If you sign that non-compete, you can't license Meridian to any competitor for 24 months, and in that window they can." "I know what they can do," Marcus said. He was sitting in his car outside Lily's school, 7 minutes early for pickup, watching the building's front doors the way he watched most things. Quietly, with a patience that other people sometimes mistook for passivity, because they had not learned yet to tell the difference. "I'm not signing it," he said. "Good. Don't." He did not sign it. Lily got in the car at 3:17, 2 minutes late, with her bag slung across both shoulders and a diagram on a folded piece of graph paper that she pressed into his hand before he could put the car in drive. "I designed a sorting algorithm in class today," she said. "Tell me if it's efficient." He looked at it. It was. The 14 days that followed operated the way that kind of time always does. Not fast, not slow, but with a particular texture of a period in which the outcome is already decided but hasn't been told to anyone yet, and all the smaller events are happening in ignorance of the larger one. Marcus filed the 2 additional patents on a Thursday morning at 8:44, from his desk in the back room, Lily already gone to school, The apartment quiet in the way that apartments are quiet when you have spent enough mornings alone in them, that the silence has a specific character, familiar and known, like the voice of someone you trust. He submitted the filing through the secure portal, attached the technical documentation he had been building across 4 months of pre-dawn sessions, and received the automated confirmation at 8:46. He sat with it for a moment. Then he got up and made more coffee. He did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate yet. What arrived on Friday afternoon at 3:52 was not something he had anticipated in precisely this form, though in retrospect he would understand that he should have. Diana Cho had moved faster than he expected. She had not waited for the non-compete to be signed. Instead, she had done something more direct. She had reached out to 3 of the licensing partners who held agreements with Marcus's earlier patents and begun the process of what James, when he called at 5:15, described with a carefully restrained fury as a coordinated pressure campaign designed to destabilize your existing licensing revenue while Halcyon positions its own competing framework as the cleaner alternative. In plain language, she was trying to cut off his income at the root. One of the 3 licensing partners, a mid-sized infrastructure company in Portland called DeNova Systems, had already suspended Marcus's quarterly payment pending legal review of the underlying IP ownership. The other 2 had sent formal inquiries to Arlen and Cole requesting documentation that Marcus had not, in fact, misrepresented his ownership of the patents they were licensing. The suspended payment was $12,000. It was not all the money he had, but it was the money he had planned to use for the next quarter's rent and Lily's spring semester field trip to the MIT Media Lab, which she had been quietly looking forward to for 3 months without ever once asking him directly whether they could afford it. He knew she wanted to go because of the way she had not mentioned it after the first time. He sat with that, in the kitchen at the table with his hands around a cold mug, for a long time after the call ended. This was the first wait. There would be another. James called back the following Monday morning, and the news he carried was careful, specific, and worse. One of Diana's associates, the young man with the rectangular glasses who had been in the room that Tuesday morning, had filed a formal inquiry with the USPTO questioning the originality of Marcus's most recent 2 patent filings, claiming that Halcyon's internal development team had reached the same architectural conclusions independently and earlier, and that Marcus's documentation appeared to draw from published research that was itself derivative of prior Halcyon work. This was not true. Marcus knew it was not true because he knew exactly where his work came from and exactly what it predated. But the inquiry would trigger a review process that could delay the formal patent grants by anywhere from 6 weeks to 4 months, and in that delay window, Diana Cho would have the opening she needed to complete a competitor acquisition. A smaller firm, a cleaner target, one without Marcus's complications, and lock Meridian out of the market before it had formal protection. She had done this quickly. She had done it well. He could almost admire it. He sat with the phone in his hands after the call and did not move for a while. Outside, the gray morning had settled into the alley in the way it did on days when the light decided not to arrive all the way, and the apartment was still in that particular way that felt less like peace and more like held breath. He was thinking about the $40 in the kitchen drawer, and the crack in the Civic's taillight, and the field trip to MIT, and the 4 years of pre-dawn sessions that had produced Meridian, and the note he had written that morning that said, "You're the reason I get up," and how he had meant it not as a comfort but as a fact, the most verifiable and non-negotiable fact in his life. He almost called James back. He had something very close to a speech prepared. Something about accepting a modified arrangement, a partial licensing deal, something that would stop the bleeding without requiring him to wait for the review process to resolve. He held the phone for a long time. He did not make the call. He put the phone down on the table and looked at his hands, the hands that had built Meridian across 4 years of mornings that no one had seen. And he understood, with a clarity that had nothing sentimental about it, that he was not going to fold because Diana Cho had moved quickly, because quick was not the same as right. And because the documentation he had assembled across 15 years of careful work was not the kind of thing that dissolved under pressure, no matter how organized the pressure was. What he would need was time. 14 days, possibly 20. The review would resolve. The filings would stand. He knew this because the work was sound. That evening, Lily came home and dropped her bag and did not say anything about MIT, or the field trip, or money, or any of the things that the quiet in the apartment might have told her were present. She sat down at the kitchen table across from him with her notebook open and began working on a problem set, and he sat across from her with his coffee, and they stayed that way for a long time. She reached across once and moved the salt shaker to the other side of the table. He looked at it. She didn't explain. He let the silence hold everything that needed holding. 22 days after the Tuesday morning meeting, on a Thursday that arrived cold and bright in the way that March sometimes does in the Bay Area, as though it has decided to pretend to be a different month for one day as a small act of charity, Marcus Webb walked back into the lobby of Halcyon Technologies. He wore the same gray hoodie. He carried the same canvas messenger bag. James Arlen walked beside him in a suit that communicated everything the hoodie did not, and behind them, carrying a slim document case, was a woman named Dr. Renata Foster, no relation to Lily's mother, though Marcus had noticed the coincidence the first time James introduced them, who was the senior patent litigation specialist at Arlen & Cole and who had, in 11 years of practice, never lost a case involving IP originality disputes. She had said when James briefed her, "This is one of the cleanest filings I've reviewed in a decade. The question isn't whether he wins. The question is how quickly." The USPTO inquiry had been resolved 3 days earlier, in a response so comprehensive and so structurally devastating to Halcyon's counterclaim that the review officer had added a note to the file. Unusual, almost unprecedented, commending the quality of the documentation. Both patents had been formally granted at 9:17 on a Monday morning, bringing Marcus Webb's total to 14 registered patents, 3 of which covered the foundational compression and data routing architecture that Halcyon's platform had been operating on without license for 8 months. They had calculated the licensing exposure at approximately $4.2 million. They had not yet calculated the damages for the coordinated pressure campaign against his existing licensing partners, which Dr. Foster described, in a tone of professional understatement, as a separate and very interesting conversation. Diana Cho's assistant had received the meeting request that morning at 7:50. It had not come from Marcus. It had come from Arlen & Cole's letterhead, with a subject line that read, "Patent Licensing and Infringement Discussion. Halcyon Technologies/Web IP Portfolio, Thursday 10 a.m. No one had told Diana who would be in the room. She was already seated at the head of the conference table when they arrived, the same silver laptop open in front of her. Her expression arranged into the practiced readiness of someone who had spent the morning preparing to handle a legal nuisance efficiently. 2 of her associates were present. One of them was the young man with the rectangular glasses. When the door opened and she looked up and saw Marcus Webb, in the same gray hoodie with the same canvas bag, her expression did not break. Did not need to yet. It was Dr. Foster who set the document case on the table and opened it and laid out, in a row, 7 pages of formal USPTO grant documentation, each page stamped and certified, each page bearing Marcus Webb's name, each page connected by cross-reference technical notation to the specific functions of Halcyon's own platform. The young man in the rectangular glasses looked at the pages. He looked at them with the particular attention of someone who knows what he is reading and does not want to be seen knowing it. His hands were very still. Diana Cho picked up the first page. She read it slowly. She turned to the second. She read that slowly too. When she set it down with a care that was not the same as the care with which she had opened her laptop that first Tuesday morning. This was a different kind of care, the kind that comes from handling something heavier than you were expecting. She looked across the table at Marcus. He was looking back at her. His hands folded on the table exactly as they had been that first morning, his expression carrying nothing that could be described as triumph or vindication or satisfaction, because none of those were the right words for what he felt, which was something closer to the quiet that follows a long decision finally enacted. "You knew," she said. He did not rush to answer. He let the room hold the question for a moment. "I knew what my work was," he said. "I was waiting to see if you did." The young man in the rectangular glasses stood up slowly from his chair and walked to the window without saying anything. He stood there with his back to the room, and the cold morning light came through the glass and lit the side of his face, and he did not turn around for a long time. Diana Cho turned to page 3 of the proposal. She turned to page 4. Her hand, where it rested on the edge of the page, was not entirely still. She turned to the final section and read the line that outlined the damages calculation for the interference with his licensing partners. And then she set the document down and sat back in her chair and pressed both hands flat against the surface of the table, and the room was absolutely quiet. She looked across the table at Marcus, and what she said then, she did not say for his benefit. She said it for the room, for her associates, for the young man at the window who had filed the counterclaim that had dissolved in 3 days. I underestimated what I didn't understand. She said it evenly, without drama, the way people say true things when they have finally run out of the room to avoid them. Marcus picked up the pen from the table and slid it across to her side. He said nothing. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the school in the Civic with the cracked taillight and parked at 311 and waited. Lily got in at 3:15 exactly, dropped her bag in the back seat, and then looked at him with a precision that had been hers since she was 8 years old. She did not ask what had happened. She looked at his hands on the steering wheel, quiet, unhurried, resting there, and at the angle of his shoulders, and she saw something in him that she had not seen in 22 days. Okay, she said. He put the car in drive. MIT trip is still happening, he said. She nodded once, slowly, and looked out the window at the afternoon light coming down through the buildings and the thin gray sky beginning to open up into something resembling blue. 6 months later, Meridian launched publicly under a licensing framework that James and Dr. Foster had spent 8 weeks structuring, a framework that included Halcyon as a client, not an owner, paying quarterly fees that arrived on time and without comment. DeNova Systems had reinstated Marcus's quarterly payment, with a letter of apology that he had read once and filed. The MIT Media Lab field trip had happened in April. Lily had sent him 3 photos and a voice note that lasted 47 seconds, in which she said twice that the compression systems they showed her were not as good as yours, but they tried. He had listened to the voice note 4 times. The apartment in East Oakland was still the apartment in East Oakland. The Civic still had the cracked taillight, though he had finally ordered the part. He still made 2 lunches in the morning, still wrote notes on receipts and utility envelopes, still sat across the kitchen table in the evenings while Lily worked and let the silence hold everything it needed to hold. James had dinner with him once in July, at a quiet place in the Temescal neighborhood, and at the end of the meal had said what he had been holding since that Thursday in March. You could have told her in that first meeting, shown her everything, made it very clear. Marcus looked at his hands. He had ordered coffee after the meal, and the cup was in front of him, and the steam was rising from it in that slow, unhurried way. No, he said, because then it would have been about me proving something. This way, it was about the work proving itself. James looked at him for a long moment. Is that something your daughter taught you? He asked. Marcus smiled, just barely, the way things mean something when they don't need to announce it. She told me once that bees keep everything alive without anyone thanking them. He looked up. I figured that was a good way to work. Here is the question this story leaves behind, and it is not a simple one. If Marcus had shown Diana Cho the full depth of his work that first Tuesday morning, all 14 patents, all of Meridian's capability, the complete picture, would it have changed what she did or only how quickly she did it? Think about that before you answer. Because the real question underneath it is this. Does transparency protect people who build quietly, or does it give the powerful an earlier warning?